Now, right up to date, experts predict more than 20 million driverless cars will be on the road in 20 years' time. The industry analysts IHS also estimate that between now and 2035, nearly 76 million vehicles with some level of autonomy will be sold. But what does that mean for the journeys we take? What will the cars look like? And who do we blame if there's an accident? Chloe Culpin has been finding out.
Inside a car of the future, this concept Mini only has a movable steering wheel and pedals. We won't need navigation panels because we'll just speak to the car, or it'll know intuitively what we might need to do. Information about our surroundings will just flash up on the windscreen.
It's just more subtly integrated. You see it when you need it, but it's not up front as a binnacle as it is today. Another display that's very important to me is the projection on the road ahead of you. You actually have what we call street vision. That means through the front grille, you can actually see the tarmac in front of you. And the projection of making left turns, arrows or speeds or obstacles you have to watch out will be projected onto the road.
We can already program our cars to greet us with our name as we get in, but in the future we won't even need to do that. This car will recognise me from my biometrics. Its sensors will know my height and weight as I approach the vehicle. Car sharing clubs already exist, but experts predict in the future few, if any, people will want to own a car. They'll prefer to share one. If they're right and cities become filled with driverless cars, then what happens to all the parking spaces? Gothenburg's traffic department has put this animation together to show how the space could be used instead.
More space for life.
But the road to autonomous driving hasn't been smooth. Just weeks ago, a man was killed in a Tesla Model S, which crashed while in autopilot mode on a highway. The US government is investigating, but experts say it was to be expected.
The vision of the future is that when there are more automated systems or fully autonomous vehicles on the road, they will be safer because they'll all be very consistent in how they drive. At the moment, most cars don't have all of these features.
So while car makers continue to dream up how vehicles in the future will look and function, politicians continue to tear their hair out over who is responsible when the person behind the wheel isn't in control of the car. Chloe Culpin reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined from Galway in Ireland via Skype by John Danaher, who's an artificial intelligence expert from the National University of Ireland in Galway. With you shortly, John, but also with me here in the studio is the technology journalist Kate Bevan. This is an exciting area, Kate, and a lot of people are investing a lot of money in it.
It is an exciting area, and in some ways it's the future, but in some ways also I think it's going to be a long time before we're really happy with driverless cars, before we're really ready to give up that control.
But Google started it all off, along with Elon Musk, I suppose, and now you see the other major manufacturers pouring investment in and amazingly getting permission to test drive some of these vehicles.
I think this is really interesting. Actually, it's not that new when you think about it. I mean, I remember cruise control on my dad's cars years ago. So the idea of an autonomous or semi-autonomous way of driving a car has been with us for a while, but I think that the technology companies have taken it to the next stage. I think there's a long way to go. Google's done a lot of work in a very narrow area in California where, as I understand it, it mapped every little crevice and corner of the road, and obviously that's impractical. So there's a lot of work to do on the algorithms on how you respond to live traffic conditions. And of course, algorithms are never perfect.
But the technology is a step ahead of public acceptability, do you think, at the moment? The public aren't ready to embrace this just yet.
I think that's fair to say. I mean, if you think about autopilots in aeroplanes, for example, which is the same sort of thing, we still have pilots, even though these planes are technically capable of flying themselves. I mean, there's an old joke about autopilots, and that one day it'll be a dog and a pilot in the cockpit, and the dog's job will be to bite the pilot if the pilot takes control. So I think we've got a long way to go before we're ready to completely trust other vehicles.
John Danaher, let's bring you in on the conversation here, because you've looked at the difficulty we have. What happens when things go wrong? What did you discover when you explored that?
Yeah, well, I guess the main issue that people talk about in relation to responsibility and liability for driverless cars is as they become more autonomous, they're less under the control of their human designers and creators. And this opens up the prospect of responsibility gap or liability gap. Most legal standards are based on the idea of what's reasonably foreseeable. So what is it reasonably foreseeable for designers of the vehicle to predict that it can do under certain conditions? A lot of these new technologies are based on machine learning. The car will actually learn and adapt to its environment in ways that won't be predictable, foreseeable by the creators. That'll open up the liability gap that is questioned.
Yes. So at the moment, is there any case law written that if I am sitting inside a driverless car, am I culpable if I hit somebody and hurt them?
Well, so this is actually really interesting, particularly in light of the accident with Tesla weeks or months back, the accident on the 7th of May. So if you look at Tesla's response to that, they're trying to suggest that the driver is responsible for this because they put in certain warnings and instructions with their autopilot system that the driver needs to be always at the ready to take over from the vehicle should unpredictable conditions arise. So they're trying to push the responsibility or liability onto the driver of the car. But I mean, you know, there is no case law, there is no legal standard in place at the moment that really deals with these scenarios. We can only just adapt and adjust the existing standards.
Because John, any number of people might be responsible for this, couldn't you? You could say the local authority or the local government that granted permission for the car, the manufacturer. They could then say, actually, it was the person who wrote that section of code. 2 lines of code were faulty, it's their fault. This is a nightmare to sort out, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it'll be a nightmare because you're also talking about people who are creating the code for these cars. These are massive teams of people. They're assembling code from pre-existing pieces of code that were written by other people. So actually figuring out one single responsible entity will be difficult. I mean, one suggested solution to this is just to adopt far more what are known as strict liability standards in law. So we don't care about foreseeability so much. We just say that there is some person who's responsible and they take the blame no matter what. Maybe somewhat equivalent to like a command responsibility standard in military contexts.
Is this going to be, Kate Bevan, do you think, a difficulty that needs to be embraced? It needs to be sorted out. The public needs to be reassured.
Yes, and I think there's another area that needs reassurance on as well, as we've already seen stories of hacks and of hackers being able to take over cars. So I think there's a long way to go before the public is going to be really happy with these autonomous or even semi-autonomous cars, although I mean, it's an amazing vision of the future.
That said, of course, I think in some car parking, I'm thinking here in London at Heathrow Airport, you can be whizzed from a car park to the terminal using a completely driverless system. The metro system, the London Underground, is experimenting with having driverless trains and things. These things are coming in incrementally, aren't they?
They are, and actually I think the place where there's really going to be a lot of growth is actually in agriculture and in industry, where you're not on the roads the whole time. You haven't got quite such a huge thing to worry about. You've got a much more clearly defined role to play. I mean, I think the point particularly about underground trains and those shuttles is they've got clear, specific, defined routes. They're not subject to the kind of randomness that a truly autonomous car will have to have.
What's the development timeframe, John, do you think, in terms of getting these things ready, not just on the legal framework which you've looked at, but in terms of getting public acceptability, confidence, if you like, in such systems?
Well, I mean, that's a really difficult question to answer, because I think what could happen is if there's some major accident or scandal with one of these systems, that could really dampen the public appetite for this for a long time. So, I mean, Tesla have been trying to do some damage control, so to speak, around the accident that occurred in May, so as to not dampen the enthusiasm for this technology and still push the narrative that this is something that is effective and safe, and that the human driver, is really the most unreliable and most unsafe part of the car. But I mean, I think that's a difficult push for people, and if there's a major accident with like a bus full of school children or something, that could really set back the development of this technology by quite a number of years.
John Danaher, thank you very much indeed. And Kate Bevan, thank you for being with us as well on that as well. Now we end with tonight's Insight Bite, a little bit of information which we think you should know about. Now you may remember the Ice Bucket Challenge. It was a video craze that swept the globe 2 years ago to raise money for ALS disease research. Now that's a neurological disorder, of course, where the motor neurons that control muscle function slowly die. And there is no cure. More than 17 million people douse themselves in icy water, including scores of celebrities like Bill Gates and Justin Bieber. It was the sort of viral campaign that some dismissed as slacktivism, in other words, lacking any real impact. But here's the thing. The Ice Bucket Challenge raised more than $100 million in just 30 days, and the money has helped scientists develop a new and potentially important gene, and it could lead to a breakthrough treatment and possibly even a cure. So that's it for tonight. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.